Hello, I'm Jay, owner of Volunteer Audio in Oliver Springs, Tennessee. I've got a 2016 Roadglide here. It's a CVO. A guy named Randy brought it to me wanting to upgrade the radio. Now it's got the old factory GT radio and it looks to have a boom stage 1 audio system. He wants the new Soundstream HDHU14. We're going to make sure that he's happy and gets this, and we're also going to upgrade the rest of the system. If you want to find out how to do this to your CVO, hang out and watch the rest of the video. All right, so I want to take a second and go over all the components necessary to properly upgrade this radio in a CVO. So Randy's CVO is beautiful. It's a 2016. I mean, a new one's $40,000+, and all he wants to do is upgrade to these modern features that a new one has. Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. This is going to have some features the new ones won't have, like a 10-band EQ and more sound adjustment, which is going to make it sound phenomenal. To do this, though, it has factory boom audio. I believe this CVO, we've not tore it down, but I believe it's got boom stage 1. Has 6.5-inch speakers in the tour pack, 6.5 in the front. Looking through the grills, looks like the boom stage 1 speakers, and from what I can tell so far, there's only one amplifier. Boom stage 2 would have at least 2 amplifiers for 4 speakers. And it gets a little bit more complex, but not really, because we're going to send you all the parts to make this very easy if you decide to do this upgrade. So we're going to start by changing out our radio. We're going to put in the HDHU14 radio. Again, the boom amp's no longer going to work, so we're going to unplug it. We're going to unbolt it off of its bracket, take it out, and we're going to plug in our Hertz plug-and-play amplifier. It's a 600-watt amp, where the factory amp is 300 on this one. And we have our own Roadglide plate that's going to bolt in just like the factory amp, and it's going to plug right in at the radio with the factory T-harness. So factory radio harness plugs in here. This is going to plug in the back of our Soundstream radio, and we're connected. We're going to run power and ground back to our battery, and then we're going to change out our speakers. Now, in this case, you could keep the boom stage 1 speakers. They're 2 ohm. They have a separate tweeter. They do work even if you just do an amplifier. So you don't have to change those, but we're going to do a pretty large upgrade, and we're going to use our Hertz SX165Neos. They're way more efficient, super clear. You're going to get more volume out of them. And even though we could amplify the stock speakers and they would be very loud, they wouldn't last long. You're going to blow them all to pieces with what we can do with 600 watts. So these are going to handle that power no problem. And the tweeter in these is pretty amazing to have a resettable circuit breaker built into them. It's actually a part that if it gets too much heat build up, sending a clip signal, maybe you've just played it too loud, too long, it turns itself down. And once the system restores back to a clean signal or it cools, it comes right back on. So you never blow these. They're pretty phenomenal. We're also going to change the front grills to a new grill design. It's a better looking grill than stock. It's got the Hertz logos to go along with it. We're going to leave our factory rear grills. Now, one thing that we send out anytime we're doing a CVO is a pack of CVO bypass harnesses. Now, this comes with every one that you're going to need. In this case, we're only going to need 1 front amp bypass harness. But if you had the 2 or 3 amp system, it comes with the additional connectors. And if you had the boom 5x7s in your lids, it also comes with the harnesses to plug those back in. So we're going to send out a whole kit if you were to order this, ready to go, plug and play, plug in connectors, bypass the amp to make this easy. Let's get to the bike. I'll get it tore down, and step by step I'll show you how to do this so that if you have a CVO, you'll be confident that you can tackle this without cutting wires and get a great end result. All right, so we're going to start by taking the fairing off. All right, we're going to get the bottom T25 Torx bolts out first. There's 1 on each side. The one right here just holds the vent on, so don't take that off. It's going to make it easier if you leave it in place. So there's 2 of those, 1 on each side on the bottom. Next, we're going to remove our speaker grills. We normally use a non-marring pry tool, something that's made of plastic so it doesn't scratch the paint. You're going to go to the inside of the grill and pry up. Very, very simple to do. We'll do the other side while we're here. Take those off. All right, now there are 2 screws. There's actually 1 on each side. They're T30. We're going to take those off last. So let's move around to the other side and take the windshield off. All right, we're going to remove the 4 screws that are holding our windshield in the upper part of our fairing on. A lot of times these are Phillips screws. In this case, they've been changed out to an Allen head. But just find the correct tool. Now keep in mind, once you remove these and you remove your last one, your windshield is going to be loose. Normally they're slotted, so you can actually loosen them up, remove the windshield and then finish removing your screws so that your windshield doesn't fall and hit the ground and get scratched up, or wouldn't want that to happen. Need to loosen a little bit more. I'll take the two inside ones off. All right, so once you've removed those 4 bolts, you can simply grab underneath here and lift, and it will come loose from the bracket on the radio, and you can lift this out of the way. All right, so next step, we're going to remove the bolt at the back of each one of our marker lights on the side. There's one on each side. This is going to be the same tool that you're going to use when you take the bolts out of the radio. It is a 3/16. So 3/16 Allen tool will remove these, as well as the radio, as well as the headlight bolts. So you're going to use this over and over. All right, so we only have 2 bolts holding our fairing on at this point, but I want, before you remove those, out here where we just lifted this up, there are 2 plug-ins that go to our side marker lights. So go ahead and disconnect those plug-ins. That way you're not fighting to do that after you took your bolts out. Now I always do this from this side, and I remove these bolts last so that there's no chance that the fairing falls off. They're a T30. But I use the same T25 that we do at the bottom. They're never that tight, so it'll take it right out. We don't have to worry about messing anything up. If you want to use the T30, you're welcome to. All right, so once you get these 2 bolts out, your inner fairing is actually completely loose, and it just slides off. All right, continuing disassembly, we're going to go ahead and remove the headlight. We're going to need to do this for access where we're going to put our amplifier, but also for access to the stock boom amplifier. As I said, the same 3/16 Allen head that you just removed your side marker light turn signal bolts are going to do the headlight. There's 2 on the top of the headlight and 2 on the bottom. All right, so this is our last bolt. Our headlight's going to be loose. All we'll have to do is unplug it and set it out of the way. All right, so our headlight's out. We're going to go ahead and remove our radio next. So there's a little push button on the main connector you're going to push in, and then you're going to rotate this lever here to release the radio plug. Next, we're going to have our USB connector. There's a plug right, or a button on the top. You're going to press that down and unplug it. We'll be reusing that with our new radio. FM antenna has a button on the bottom of it that has to be pressed. If I can get it to release, sometimes they're a little difficult to get to let go. All right. Sometimes they're a little bit of a struggle. Now the GPS antenna's got a little bitty button toward the rear that if you push will release it. Now we're not going to use the GPS antenna in the future because our new radio does navigation through Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So we're going to cut the zip ties and just take this antenna out of here. We also had Sirius XM on this radio. We're going to remove that antenna as well because the new radio has Sirius XM, but it does it through the Apple CarPlay Android Auto app. So it does not require an antenna any longer for that to work. So we'll get it unplugged as well. Sometimes these are pretty difficult to get to release. All right, so now we've got everything unplugged from the radio. We're going to remove our 4 bolts, same 3/16 Allen head, and remove the radio. Now I want to make mention while I'm here, this plate that's held on with these 2 T25 Torx bits is going to transfer to our new radio. A lot of people don't put that back on. I just want to make mention of it so that hopefully you don't forget when you're doing your install. to take our radio out and set it to the side. All right, so now that our radio's out, we can clearly see our factory boom amplifier. To get to the 4 bolts holding it in, it's much easier just to remove the speaker pods. So I'm going to disconnect the Sirius XM and nav antenna, cut those zip ties, get those out of the way, unplug the front speaker pods, and start unbolting those now. All right, you have your factory USB cable that's hooked to the front corner of the pod, so just undo that connection. We're not going to cut it, we're just going to pull it out. On the opposite side, we have the same thing, but it's going to our cigarette lighter. Let's get that unplugged as well. All right, last but not least, we need to make sure we unplug each of our speaker connections. It's going to be right underneath this CB module. We'll probably go ahead and remove that as well, because that's no longer going to work with the new radio. And we find that most of our customers do not use CB either. All right, so that's undone. Let's get the pods off. All right, so on the pod, there are 2 upper bolts. I always take those out last because it's much easier to let those hold everything in place while we go. So go to the front here of the pod, and you'll find another 3/16 Allen. There'll be 3 total here on the bottom side. So 1 toward the front, 1 on the bottom edge, then 1 at the front right next to the headlight. Now you can change the speakers without pulling these pods, but the reason we're pulling the pods are we're going to get to those amplifier bolts, and if you're adding an amp with a Roadglide bracket, just go ahead and take the pods off. It's going to make it a lot easier to get to the bolts for your new amp as well. All right, speaker pod number 1 is down. Do the same thing on the other one. All right, I got the 3 side. Now last but not least, these 2 top ones. All right, so it looks like our factory amp is held in with probably a 10mm bolt. First thing we want to do is we want to unplug the main connector on the end of the amplifier. Then we're going to remove those 10s and slide the amp out the back. In this particular one, because it does have the CB module and we're not going to use it anymore, I'm going to remove that also just to get it out of the way, and there's no need to leave that weight in the fairing. Yeah, it's a 3/8 bolt for the CB. All right, I'm going to disconnect that. There's a factory block-off plug we'll plug back in. Now let's undo our antenna. All right, so we're going to remove our 4 bolts. 2 back ones are kind of easy to get to. I'll get a wrench for the front ones to make sure we don't damage the gauges. The factory ones are a 3/8. One more to go. So if you're watching this and you've decided, I think I want to buy this setup for my bike, you can definitely go on our website at volunteeraudio.com, look under our complete install kits, and we'll have a package already made that comes with the amplifier, the radio, and all the speakers. Now if you have a CVO, buy it as if it's a Street Glide or a Road Glide that's non-CVO, and simply add the CVO bypass harnesses. There'll be notes for that in the description as well. So we got our amplifier out. We'll continue our disassembly of the gas tank and removing the seat next. All right, we're going to go ahead and remove our seat. First, we're going to remove our backrest, get it disconnected and out. On this particular one, you have the leather strap for the passenger, so you'll open one of the bags and remove the Phillips screw that holds that on. Next step, we're going to go to the back of the seat. This one also has a Phillips screw holding it on as well. Some have a thumb screw, some have a bolt. Never know what's going to be back there, but most time factory it's a Phillips screw. All right, this is also a heated seat, so as I lift it off, I'm going to have to find those plug-ins and unplug it. Yep. Next step, we're going to pull the gas tank. All right, so we're going to remove our fuel sending unit. Just unplug it. It's going to be the gray plug. On this one, there's also a black plug we're also going to be undoing for our intercom system. Pull your fuel vent out from below, and then we have a fuel return line that we're going to also unclip. Now this particular bike, as I'm looking here, looks like it has LED lights under the gas tank. So we're going to make sure and unplug those, because the last thing we want to do is lift the gas tank up and damage someone's lights. There we go. Those are undone. Now let me get my tools and we'll unbolt it. All right, so we're going to remove our bolts from our gas tank. On the front, on each side, there's going to be a little rubber cover that's over top of the bolt. This one has some added vents as well that they've added to the front. These are 13 millimeters. While we're here, we always go ahead and take the two for the battery tray out at the same time, because we're fixing to have to get to the battery also. Remove the two from the battery tray, two from the back of the gas tank. We're also going to remove one from each side at the front of the tank. Find that one here in a second. All right, so I don't want you to forget though, you have to undo the fuel line on the other side of the tank. It's a quick disconnect, it's very easy. There's a silver sleeve that you just push up and it's going to release the fuel line and let you drop it down. All right, so I've got our fuel disconnect undone. I always take a paper towel and try to catch any gas that may drip. Let's go ahead and set this tank over to the side. Make sure we're not hooked to any other lights. All right, so at this point our gas tank's off. Here in a little while we'll remove the backbone cover, but I'm going to start reassembling the front. We're going to mount our amp, put our radio in, our front pods and speakers back in, and then we'll route our wire into the back and continue on. All right, so we're ready to start reassembly. So we're going to take our amplifier. We're going to ship it to you for a Road Glide already mounted to the plate for our amp plate. We're going to slide it in just like the factory amp came out, just like that boom amp. Now one thing to make sure is just make sure you don't get any wires stuck in the sides that you're going to pinch. And there is actually a provision for this wire to clear up here in the front that you'll see it's a little cutout. You want to make sure your wires feed through that as you go forward. Just kind of wiggle it in. It's a tight fit. All right, so you're going to have 4 bolts. I'm going to go ahead and start the rear 2 because they're a little easier to get to. Just going to hand start each one. Now I always take, this thing is a powder coated plate. Sometimes that powder coat is in the threads. So before I ever get to this point, I normally start the bolts, run them through the plate, and then remove them back out before I get into the part where I'm in the bike. Because if you have threads that are hard to start in the bike, it can be a major pain. And you can help yourself by just running them through before you get going. All right, so 3 are started. Let me start the 4th one. We'll get our tools and get them tightened up. All right, so they're all started. I'm going to use a power tool to do the back ones and a wrench to do the front, just like we took it out. Our new bolts are an 11 millimeter, where the factory were 3/8. Make sure they're good and tight so they don't come out. Sometimes this plate, the manufacturer that makes it for us, normally it comes with bolts. Sometimes it comes with large Phillips screws. Either way, the Phillips screwdriver makes it a little easier to take a Phillips screw and put it in behind these gauges versus a large socket. But I like the fact that we can use a wrench, one of these ratchet wrenches, and get it really tight when it's a bolt. But I think due to shortages worldwide, they used some screws for a while, but looks like they're back to bolts for now. Okay, all of those are tight. Let's move on to getting our speaker pods back on. All right, we're gonna go ahead and change the speakers out in our pods. We're gonna do this over here on the counter. You could do this with it mounted in the bike. It can work either way, but since we already have them off because we're doing the amp install, we'll do it here where hopefully you can see a little better. There are 4 T25 Torx screws that hold it in. This was the Boom Stage 1 speaker, which has the little separate tweeter in the corner. We're upgrading to the Hertz SX165Neo. It's an excellent speaker. We've got an upcoming video. I don't know if it'll be shown before or after this one, but we've been doing some speaker reviews, and I'll be showing you a comparison between the SX and SV series from Hertz, along with the Infinities, the kicker options, and the new precision power options. But it's been a great speaker for us. We've been using it now for, well, since its inception, since it was made, and we've had zero trouble out of it. All of our customers really like it. But we'll show you those options in a future video, what the differences are between the different ones. So I just removed my speaker, and I want to go over what I just did. It is labeled positive and negative on the back. And what we do is we squeeze each one of these connectors to make it a little tighter, because we definitely want to make sure that at no point this comes unplugged in the future from our speaker. As you're unplugging it, you'll make sure which is positive and negative, but I'll go ahead and tell you, always this white clearish plug is going to be your positive. The larger black one is the negative, and we have terminals on the back of our speaker that are the correct size for this. So we're going to plug the black one into the negative port. We're also going to plug that whitish clear connector into the positive. You want to plug them all the way in and then give them a little tug and make sure they don't come unplugged easily. Sometimes they're not easy to plug in after you've squeezed them tight either, but that's a good thing. You don't want them to come loose. All right, so I've got them both plugged in. Give them a tug, make sure they're in there good and tight. Now, I always want to make sure that I put my logos correctly, because you can see them sometimes through some of the grills. So we're going to position the speaker so our logo's at the bottom. There's actually a little rubber nipple that sticks out on the pod that lines up with a hole that Hertz put in their speaker. These are built specifically for Harley. They sound great in a car, but they are Harley speakers. So once we get that lined up, we'll just put our 4 screws back in. We'll repeat this on our other pod, and then we'll go over to the bike and we'll put these on. Start all your screws and then tighten them up at the end. That way you don't have something fighting you where you've tightened one and it's not exactly centered. And always use hand tools on the speakers, because we want to make sure we don't poke a hole in the speaker with a drill. Now, the SX165Neo, while we're here, I'll talk about the fact it is waterproof. It has a weather-treated cone. It has a gasket around the tweeter that keeps water from getting to the voice coil. And it is, like I say, designed for a Harley. We have no water issues whatsoever out of them. And this particular speaker, we warranty at Volunteer Audio for 3 years. So amp and speaker are 3 years. You won't find a better warranty in the industry. Most people won't even give you a year. And they definitely won't cover blown speakers. We cover it all. All right, so I've got this one done. I'm going to go ahead and do the other one, then we'll catch back up on the bike and install them. All right, so we've got our speakers in our pods. Let's go ahead and get them mounted back on the bike. So start with your top 2 bolts first. Get those in place. That'll hold the pod while you put your other ones on. All right, I'm going to get the other 3 in place. All right, plug it back in. Get our front connector snap back in that holds our wire to our cigarette lighters. Let's grab our second pod and put it in now. All right, so let's repeat the same process on the other side. Same thing as the other side. Make sure and plug your USB that goes to your radio. It's got a little clip that goes in the front of this pod. We want to clip it in place, as well as plug our front speaker wire back in. All right, so next we're going to drop our radio in place. Go ahead and get it ready to plug it back in. All right, so the radio, I've already swapped the bracket over. As you'll see here, there is a bracket that was off the old radio. We've already moved it. We're going to make sure that the wiring that we have in front is just positioned where the screen doesn't interfere with it any. All right, our radio's in. Now, I've got our 4 bolts. Now, there are 4 little rubber isolator bushings. They're going to come with your Soundstream radio. You want to put each one of those on these bolts, and that's going to center the radio up exactly where it was factory. Here are those little bushings. Slide each one over the end of the bolt. They're kind of hard rubber, and I find it's easier to start them on the bolt and then push them down with our tool into the actual radio. All right, so those bushings make sure that it pulls the radio to the same spot it originally was, and this Soundstream radio is identical in every aspect to your factory radio. So the exact fitment that you had factory is exactly how this one's going to look. So it's going to line up with the fairing just like the stock one did. Now I want to be clear on which one we're using. I know this is a CVO. It had the factory boom audio. This is the HDHU14 Plus. With this radio, you cannot retain a boom amplifier. Now, as you see in this video, we're adding the Hertz 600 watt amp. You don't have to do that. You could simply bypass the factory amp with our plug, and you could use the amp that's in the radio. It is a 300 watt amp, which is very equivalent to what was stock in this bike. So if you don't have the money yet to do that, simply plugging in those bypass plugs would make it work. We have a future model coming. We're expecting it maybe around the end of April. It's really hard to say. That future model will have the ability to use a Maestro interface that will retain the factory boom amplifiers. Still not sure if that's a great thing or not. I mean, it's going to be easy for you if you want to keep them, but they don't sound great. I've never been happy with boom stage 1 or stage 2, and that radio is probably going to be roughly $400 more than this radio to keep that going. And if that's the sole purpose for going to the next model, I would put that money toward a better amplifier. But this so far has been a great radio, so I don't really see a reason that we need to spend the money on another one. But there will be some other features, we'll go over those when it comes out, that may be something you want. One thing is the data display on the radio, TPMS, oil life, EITMS. So the system, all these things still work with this radio, but if you had a newer GTS radio, it would show it on the factory radio screen instead of just in instrumentation. But our radio's mounted in, 4 bolts, very easy. We're going to plug in our factory USB connector. We're going to plug in our factory antenna. Let me find where we went with the antenna here. We will not be plugging in the factory GPS antenna or the factory Sirius XM antenna because it doesn't require either one of those. All we've got to plug in is our main harness back in. So this T-harness that comes with our amp has that factory connector, goes right into our radio. Same thing as we removed it. You're just going to flip this lever and it's going to lock it in. Now I want to take a second. I want to go over the differences between the boom systems because this particular one is not one we see often. I do a lot of boom systems and CVOs. They're almost always boom stage 2. If you have 4 speakers and 1 amp, you actually have boom stage 1. If that is the case, you'll have to let us know when we build your amplifier and we'll add the front amp bypass harness. We have to wire it in. If you have boom stage 2, this isn't a problem because it's just a plug-in that bypasses the amps and nothing has to be wired in. In this case, we do have the stage 1 system and we've wired our rear outputs of our amp into this plug to give our rear speakers power. But it is as easy as just plugging it in and we've bypassed that factory amplifier. So nothing that you're going to have to know how to do, but if you have a CVO, 4 speakers, only 1 amp, which is the one in the fairing, there's none in your bags or your tour pack, then you're going to have to let us know and we'll add this in as we're wiring in your amplifier. We've already preset the gains and all the settings on the amp, so that's easy as well. So I plugged the radio back in. You'll see on the other side of this harness, we actually have the other mating factory plug that's going to plug directly into our stock harness. We're going to tuck all this behind the headlight, zip tie it in place, and then we'll be able to put our headlight back in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove this backbone cover. So we've got our amp mounted radios in, speakers are in. Next I'm going to run the power wire up to the battery. So earlier we took off the gas tank. Now I'm going to cut a couple zip ties that are in here holding things in place. We're also going to cut this piece of Tessa tape that runs across to make sure that we can get this cover off. All right. Oh, here it is. Normally I take a small screwdriver and I just use it to unclip this cover from the top. It's easier than using my fingers. There's going to be snaps across the front and down each side. Unclip our brake lines. Make sure you put those back where they go at the end. We're going to expose this main backbone. This is where Harley runs all of their wires, and we believe it's the right place to run ours as well. You'll see some guys install it right up the side here. But we want to make sure it's secure and it never falls out and down on the motor. All right, so there we have it. All right, so I'm going to go to the front. I'm going to run the wire. We find it easier on the Roadglide to run it up the right side. There's not really anything in the way, so I'll fish it up this way, and we'll run it down this backbone. All right, so I was able to pull our power and ground wire up this side now. Now we've already installed your fuse holder. You could take the fuse holder off. It makes it just a little easier to run it, but it's definitely not necessary. We've already wrapped the end of this one with Tessa tape just so the exposed area looks like factory wires. We'll run it in this backbone, down toward the gas tank, and then we'll reinstall that cover. All right, so we've got it all tied back in. Make sure that we keep these other harnesses somebody else has previously run where we don't pinch those. We're ready to put our gas tank back on. I think that's the next step we're going to do, then we'll hook up our battery. Now this gas tank is a little low on fuel, which makes it a lot easier. Sometimes you'll deal with one that's full of gas. Either way, it's not going to leak out as you go because it is the quick disconnect cuts the fuel off as soon as you unplug it. Just double checking that this man's lights are all where they're supposed to be. We didn't let any wires fall out of where it's supposed to go. Everything looks good, so I'm going to put our bolts back in our gas tank. Let's get our tools going the right direction. I'm going to start all the bolts before I tighten them, because if you tighten the back ones first, you'll have a hard time getting the front ones in. I'm going to finish tightening these back bolts. All right, so you also have two little rubber covers. You took off the front gas tank bolts in the beginning. You want to make sure and put those back on. All right, so those covers are on. Now normally I would go ahead and plug in the sending units, but we're fixing to pull the cover from the battery. So we're going to leave that undone for now. You can go ahead and route your fuel vent back down where it goes factory. And your fuel return line. And I'm going to go ahead and reconnect our fuel, the quick disconnect at the fuel tank. Again, I'm going to put gloves on. I get cuts on my hands a lot. I don't want to get the gas on my hands for, it dries them out, but it also burns every one of the cuts that we get from working. So again, there's a little chrome sleeve. You push it up, push the fuel line in, pull the sleeve back down, it locks it in place. You'll hear it click in. So fuel line's back connected. There's a lot going on top of this battery box. Somebody's added some other lights. We're just going to unplug each item. First, we're going to take our ECM. This is your engine control module. Take it loose and set it over here to the side. You don't have to unplug it. We're also going to unsnap each one of these connectors that went up to our fuel tank. One more plug here to undo. All right, so once each one of these things is done, you're going to lift from the back, slide this thing forward. Oh, let's see here, we've got another part that they've added on. This is not factory. Over the front of the battery box, so I'll slide it out of the way. Looks like it's probably the light controller. All right, so once we get it out, now this cover is going to come off the top of our battery. All right, so now we just have a large Phillips screw on each side holding our cables down to our battery. We're going to hook our negative side to the one to the right. It's also marked with a negative symbol on the battery. Always make sure the cables are pointed forward. That's going to make it easier to put this cover back on at the end. Now there's a factory ground point on the frame just in front of this. We do not use that point for amplifiers so that we pick up less noise and interference from things like LED lights and other things in the bike. It's better to go all the way to the battery. So again, fuse holder is already installed, fuse is already in place. It is a motorcycle specific fuse holder with a rubber cover to keep water out. We also zip tie that closed just to make sure it doesn't inadvertently come undone and arc out on something. After we've got that connected, we're just going to feed this to in front of the battery. There's a lot of room in the front here that you can fit this down in before you put your battery cover back on. So now just put the cover back on the same way you took it off. All right, so once your cover's on, don't forget to put your bolts back in the back of the battery tray. All right, I'm gonna plug everything back in like it was. That's our heated seat plugs. We've got to plug it back in later. All right, so all of our connections are back made. And we got to hook back up all of his lighting. Let's see. L1 that runs up here. And one that runs to the other side. So that's back in place. Next, we'll take care and do our rear speakers. All right, we're going to go ahead and remove our rear speakers. We're to that point now. This one actually has the nicer grills. A lot of times it's just a cloth grill. CVOs generally have nicer grills on everything. So we're going to reuse these and install our Hertz SX165Neos in the back. Now you're going to realize when you get this off and you look at it, that from the factory, each one of these little fine threaded screws go into a rubber bushing. And that rubber bushing, the only thing that tightens it into this pod is the fact that that screw goes in it. And so when we put a better speaker, normally we won't go back into this hole. We clock it just slightly and actually go into the plastic. Because if not, as we tighten these up and then you're going down the road and you've got all this extra power in these speakers, these want to pull out. And we don't want that to come loose later on you. So definitely make sure you look at your polarity. Again, the larger terminal is your negative. The smaller one is your positive. In this case, that big one is also gold in color. That is our negative terminal. All right, so another boom stage 2 speaker, just like we had, or stage 1 speaker, just like we had in the front. I'm going to get both of these out. Very easy to do. It is going to take a small, I think it's a T10. Yeah, it's a T10 small Torx to remove these. Again, we won't be reusing these screws. We'll be using a self-tapping screw into the plastic. And it actually holds better. All right, now that we have them out, I'm going to grab our other speakers and we'll go back together. All right, so just like we did on the front, I want you to take a pair of pliers of some sort. I've got a pair of needle nose here. Tighten these connectors up. We don't want them to come unplugged later and cause you to have to pull these back out. Again, that larger gold terminal in this case is our negative. You see it's fitting very tight. The smaller one is our positive. All right, so inside the right side pod, there is a control. That controller gets in the way of your speaker in some cases where you can put your connections. So you're going to want to twirl the speaker around till it clears that. And sometimes that means you'll have to clock the speaker where the logo may be upside down or at a different angle. Now our grill is going to hide that in this case. If you're really picky, I am most of the time, if I've got a grill where I can see that, I'm going to actually take this little capacitor loose and I glue it to the other side. That clears it and lets me put my logo up. In this case, we're not going to see it through the grill, and it's not really going to be an issue because we're using that factory Harley grill. I do want to make sure when we put our grill on that we keep our shield logo where it looks like it's at the right angle. We'll have great fitment right there. Again, we're going to clock it a little to one side, just beside the original holes, and we're going to use these self-tapping screws to hold it in. Go till it's tight, but do not strip out the plastic. Always start with this one because it's going to make you put it a certain position to clear the controller, and then you can make the other one match at the same angle. One more screw. All right, so that easy. It looks like factory, but we now have our much louder, much clearer Hertz speaker. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, again, the large gold one goes to negative. The smaller one that is silver in color goes to our positive. This is very important. If we get our polarity on one speaker backwards, you're going to call me and say, hey, these new speakers don't have any bass. The truth is they have pretty good mid bass, but they're not going to seem like they have any bass. If you get one of them firing opposite from the other, those bass notes are going to cancel each other. All right, I think we look pretty good right there. Looks like it matches. Points about to the same place. All right, so our speakers are installed. We don't have much to go. I'm going to go ahead and put our seat back on. Then we'll move up front and put our fairing on, and we'll be wrapping this bike up. All right, it's that time. We're ready to put the seat back on. We're going to make sure and plug up our heated seat first. There we go. Got that plugged in. Make sure the front of our seat goes where it's supposed to go and it lifts in. All right. All right, so our seat's on. We're going to move back up front. We're going to tidy up a little bit of wiring and put our headlight back in. All right, so I want to tell you what I've already done. So the T-harnessing that went from the amp to the radio, we simply put that behind the headlight. So I unplug this black connector that's on this side. I route the wiring up and over it. That allows us to go over the bracket behind the headlight with our main radio connector. And then we were able to put everything behind there and secure it. And there's a big hole there with plenty of room. So that keeps all of this very, very clean, as well as gives us plenty of room for our headlight to plug back in. So let's get it plugged in and put it back in position. Before I tighten these down, he had some screens he had put in these front vents, probably to keep a June bug from coming through and hitting you or something. So we're going to go ahead and put those back in place. All right, so reattach the harnessing to the back of the headlight like it was factory. All we have left now is to put our fairing back on. We're going to mount our microphone to our upper vent. You don't have to put the mic on unless you want the ability to take a hands-free call while you're going down the road, or also if you want to try to use your voice assistant to control, say, Google Maps, Apple Maps, select your music and such hands-free. Not everybody thinks they can do that, and definitely when you're going slower it can hear you. If you're running 80 miles an hour, it's probably not going to work. But we're going to go ahead and put it in place so that our customer has that option. So for the meanwhile, make sure you go ahead and put this microphone cord up toward the front and put a zip tie around it. That way when you get to that point, you're not digging down in here trying to figure out where it is falling. It's going to make it much easier for you to add the mic later. It also keeps it up where you can disconnect it just like you do this particular light connector when you take your fairing apart. All right, let's grab our fairing and get the outer fairing back on. Definitely make sure you start the bolts straight. If you get them crooked or cross-threaded, you're going to hear a bunch of squeaking noise out of those brass fittings. Stop, back it out, and get it back in straight, or it's going to lock in and you're not going to be able to get it out. So at this point, plug in those turn signal side marker lights. And you'll see here I've got our microphone connection where we can easily access that. So you'll see this plate. We transferred it from the original radio over to the Soundstream radio. So we have that. That's going to allow us to lock this in as well. I'm going to go ahead and put the microphone in place on this where we want it. That's going to be pretty simple to do. So if you were to look at where this is going to go, there's a little cut right here between the vent. If you can see that, I'm going to run the cord right up through there, and I'm going to two-way adhesive that microphone right here behind the windshield. We're going to leave the cord underneath it, which will allow us to plug in here as we go together. All right, so we've stuck our microphone onto our fairing. We've pulled the wire through that little cut. We're now just going to plug it into this connection that we zip tied earlier. Let this wire just drop in here underneath the fairing. All right, let's slide it back in just like we would a factory without the mic. It's going to snap right down there, and then you can position that microphone before you put your windshield in place. Now this microphone, it is a they call it a ribbon mic. It'll pick up off center. It does not have to be pointed toward you. So wherever it decides to vibrate around and hang out here, as long as it's here, it'll be able to hear you. Next step, we'll go ahead and get this, get these screws in. Get our little doodads back on around this windshield. All right, so we got our windshield back on. We've got to put our last 2 Torx bolts in the bottom. Then we'll move on to putting our speaker grills on. All right, so those are in. Let's get our grills ready. All right, I want to take a second and mention these grills. So this customer wanted a better looking grill, and Hertz does not make a Harley Davidson speaker grill. But at Volunteer Audio, we do. So we source some of the very best parts. We feel this is the best grill. It's actually made by Kicker. We re-logo them with Hertz logos so it matches your speakers. We have them for Street Glide and Road Glide, as well as the new cut kits from Precision Power. I think it's the best looking cut kit we've had yet to add 6x9s in the rear. If you buy those with Hertz 6x9s, we re-logo those also with Hertz logos. But I want to take a second to tell you about that because I don't know of anywhere else you can source these parts currently. They go on just like factory, so they're just going to snap in. They've got a much better look than the factory grill. All right, so little story. I had a guy call me the other day. He got his new Soundstream Reserve radio. He put it in, and he's calling me. He says, hey, where can I get a screen protector for my radio? He says, I've scratched the glass when I washed my bike. I thought, there is no way. This thing it's an optically bonded glass screen made like the GTS radio, and they just don't scratch their glass. So I want to take a second. I want to tell you about this. There is a protective coating on the screen. There's a little pull tab in the corner. You need to pull that off the radio. This is just plastic. It will scratch very easily, but it's just to keep dirt and things off the screen while you install it. But take this off. You don't need a screen protector. You're not going to drop this like your phone and crack it when it lands on the ground. So this optically bonded glass has an excellent display, and we don't have to worry about any scratches. So I just want to be clear on that, but you have to take this off or you're going to think you scratched it. And it's so clear you may not even realize it's there. So we've got the bike done. We're going to turn it on and see what it sounds like. All right, let's see what it sounds like. I've got my Bluetooth connected. We're going to play our copyright-free music. Wow, that was loud. As you could tell, you can't hear me speak while it's playing. Very, very crystal clear highs, deep mid bass, very punchy. I'm sure our customer is going to be very, very happy. He's going to pick it up tomorrow. Hopefully we'll get him to set it up. We'll do a walk away, see how far away it's crystal clear like it is in here. I think it gives us a much better example of what it sounds like. So I hope this video has helped you. I hope it's encouraged you. I hope it's shown you how you can do this to your bike. If that's outside of your wheelhouse, definitely call us. I'd love to do the installation for you, but if you want to do it yourself, I'll do all the hard work and set everything before it ships to you. Thank you for watching the video. Thank you for liking it, subscribing to the channel. Definitely share it with your friends. Tell others about us. And thank you. God bless. Fixing to do the walk away with you now. Quick rundown. Soundstream Reserve head unit, our Hertz 600 watt plug and play amp, 2 pairs of SX165Neo Hertz coaxials. So let me get this thing started and we'll walk away and check it out. Turn it up some. Sounds so good, it's hard to show you on YouTube how well it sounds. So you know, we got 2 6.5s pointed a little bit toward the sky, the other 2 pointed the wrong direction. The idea is still loud and very clear. hopefully I'll do a video soon. I'll show you our retail location, walk you through our warehouse. I've got a garage we built here just for YouTube videos. This isn't where our retail location is, but I'll do a video soon and show you all about that. Man, it sounds better than the boom audio system that was in it. So much better. I know our customer's gonna be so happy when he's riding down the road. I think you get the idea. We're probably, I don't know, 150 feet away now. Let's go a little bit longer. It's about to pick back up. That little dot of a motorcycle down there is making all that sound. You get the idea. Thank you for watching. Hope you have a good day and God bless.